Hey, Girl Up Gang. We're Sophia, and this is LeadHer Voice, the podcast where girls and women ignite change and inspire the future. Brought to you by Girl Up USA, and we're here for bold ideas and fearless conversations. LeadHer Voice is all about bringing women to the forefront in honor of Women's History Month. And today we're spotlighting women in media, and we're so excited to welcome Morgan Jerkins. Let's get started.
Welcome to the show. Today we're joined by the brilliant Morgan Jerkins, a celebrated writer, editor, and cultural critic whose work explores race, identity, and the intersections of history and modern life. She's the New York Times bestselling author of This Will Be My Undoing, Wanderings in Strange Lands, Call Baby, and her latest novel, Zeal. Her writing has appeared in Vanity Fair, the New York Times, The Atlantic, and more. A dynamic voice in contemporary literature, Morgan's storytelling uncovers hidden histories and personal narratives that inspire and challenge. Let's dive into her journey, insights, and the impacts of her work. So, Morgan, what inspired you to pursue writing? Was it like in specific age or time period did you start to think, okay, like writing is what I'm meant to do?
I was 14. Up until that point, I thought I had my whole life planned for me, if you can imagine, eighth grade. My father is an OBGYN and entrepreneur, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor just like him and take over his medical practice someday. So the goal was to go to college and get, for example, an MD or PhD from Columbia. And when my mother remarried and moved to another town, I was became so much like a recluse and very isolated from my friends, and I was a victim of bullying at that time. And because I was not a confrontational person, I drew even more inward. And because of that, my imagination became extremely fertile. And so I just started to write as a therapeutic vent and as a form of solace. I didn't know if I was meant to do that, but I knew that at the time, like, this is what sort of infused new life in my bones, so to speak. It really just kept me going day in and day out. When I would go to school, I would hurriedly go home, do my homework, and just start writing on my desktop.
That's so cool. That's such a unique story, too. Could you walk us through the time when you were a recent college grad grappling with the uncertainty of being like a first-time writer?
Oh, it was before I was even a college grad. I studied at Princeton. And as you know, Princeton is a very exclusive place. And I did not take for granted how ambitious everyone was around me and how much of an honor it was to call these people my classmates and my colleagues. Princeton at the time had a very highly competitive creative writing program. You had to show writing samples in order to get into it. I didn't get in. I was rejected twice, and it was a huge stain on my self-esteem because I thought to myself, well, if I can't get into the creative writing program as an undergrad, there's no way that I'm going to be able to make it through the literary ecosystem of the outside world. On top of that, I could not get a job in publishing upon graduating. I was told at the time that I had to have an unpaid internship and I had to have a literary background. I had a comparative literature degree. I had many unpaid internships under my belt, and I could not get a job as, for example, an editorial assistant or an assistant to a literary agent making at most 35,000 a year. So it definitely, I mean, my self-esteem reached, I think, its nadir at that point because I felt like I had all this experience and all this potential energy and had no avenues to turn it kinetic. So it was definitely for me a bit of a detour in a sense to sort of figure out my own path. The detour didn't last long, thankfully, but at the time I thought I was gonna just be stuck back in my hometown after graduating. I did not see a path forward at first.
So, as you were writing the book, who were some mentors that inspired you and gave you some encouragement?
Oh man, I mean, so I actually went to Bennington College for grad school. And so a lot of my former advisors at the time, Brian Morton, Deidre McNamer, Angie Cruz, they were people, and Alexander Chi, they were people that really encouraged me at the time to just continue writing and made me feel like, oh, I do have something special, and that's what really helped. I did a lot of reading of other Black female authors that I didn't know directly at the time, but I love their work. Roxane Gay, Toni Morrison, for example, Pearl Cleage, Nikki Giovanni, like the women that came before me.
Beautiful.
So were you surprised by like the reception This Will Be My Undoing received and the impact it really had on your readers?
Yes, yes. I was just blown by the fact that I had a book deal. And so once I got the book deal, I had it in my mind that, okay, well, it's time for me to write. And I lived by myself. I was very in a studio apartment in Harlem. So my life was very much narrow in a sense. I just worked from home. I did what I had to do. And so I had no idea that This Will Be My Doing would have the success that it would have, because you don't really think about that when you're writing a book. You have to write for yourself first and foremost. And I was so ready to give voice and immortalize the experiences that I have suppressed since I was a child. And so that's what I was thinking about, making it the best book that I could make at the time. So all the success that followed was pretty much a bonus. It was a pretty exciting time.
It's so cool hearing about your success and the fact that it was actually really surprising for you. But learning to handle criticism is such a critical part of being a writer. How did you like navigate negative feedback and all sorts of online trolls?
Oh, I mean, the biggest thing is you have to know your community. Whether your community is a romantic partner, um, your siblings, friends that you've had since freshman year, it is important that you have your community to remind you not only of who you are, but also where you're going. Because oftentimes they can see more than you can. I think the biggest thing for me is that there are certain types of people that I've learned growing up. Um, there are people that don't know who you are. There are people that like your work. There are also people that are going to mischaracterize your work, regardless of what you've written or how you presented yourself. And I think when I was younger, I was so exhausted by that because I wanted to prove myself, because I already had that insecurity, want to prove myself in every single space that I was in. And then I realized that I had nothing to prove. And I don't mean that in like a cocky, egoistic type of way. I meant it in a sense that like I'm doing the best that I can. And the people that understand me, strangers and community members alike, will treat me with grace and compassion as I am trying to teach myself. And another thing is, you know, especially as a Black woman, I only have one life. I have one body, and I am not going to expend mental energy and emotional labor on people that never really cared to get to know me or my body of work ever. And I think with the time that we're in right now, it is so addicting, rather, to rage bait, to see the worst in others for clicks, for brand deals, for visibility. And I have to tell myself, no, it's not soft or weak if I decide not to look at the comments of an article that I'd written. It's not weak if I decide, you know what, after a certain hour, I don't want to go on this device or whatever. Like I'm protecting myself, as each and every one of us does. So I think it's just like, yeah, like maybe I am soft and I deserve to be held softly. And I deserve to be held delicately. And I would do that for other people as well. So having more guardrails in place. We are not meant as human beings to be susceptible to all things all the time, even people's opinions. Our brains and our systems cannot handle that. And I think that, as I've gotten older, I've realized like have certain guardrails in place to protect yourself and also do the work that you want to do. Because there is a difference between those who are creating and those who are reacting. And I look to the people who are creating in spite of.
I love that. Yeah, and especially the bit about you deserving, that softness and soft life. And I feel like that's something that I see more and more women of color saying online. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Um,
And, and then fast forward a couple of years when you release your second book, Wandering in Strange Lands, and where you created the Great Migration routes across America and traced back history going back 300 years. How long was that journey for you, and what was the most surprising discovery during that journey?
so I will say, like, I didn't create the migration routes. I kind of just recreated them. You know what I mean? They were already there. And they were there because I was listening to the stories of people's families and the people that came before them. It was 2018. Wow. And the journey took a span of several months. What ended up happening was I was trying to bridge the gap between those who um, fled during the Great Migration and those who remained, and trying to forge these sort of intergenerational overlapping dialogues that happen from coast to coast, east and west of the Mississippi. And it was fun. It was fun because I like hearing people talk, especially when it's about their lineages and understanding how deep they go. Um, it was a process, because I was traveling across the country. I was in the Low Country, I was in Louisiana, I was in Oklahoma, I was in California. It took time, it took money that I am not going to be dismissive of the privileges in that. And also, it took bravery that I'm still processing years later. Like, I was going to unknown places with nothing but my recorder and my phone in my purse. That's it. I had people to contact in terms of, safety measures and letting them know when I got home, but that was it. And I think that's like when you're so locked in on a goal, you don't really think about all of the variable elements that could happen. But it was thrilling.
Amazing. And I see that you carried a lot of your learnings from that book for your new novel, Zeal. And first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now a four-time author. And
Thank
on Instagram, you mentioned that the book took 4 years of your life, and at times you felt you wouldn't finish.
Yeah,
What kept you going during that writing process?
my friends, honestly. Like, one of my friends could tell you that there were times when I cried because I was also going through a lot personally, a lot of professional changes, a lot of personal change. So having that in conjunction with artistic struggles is a lot, and it makes you doubt yourself. And not only that, when I came up with Call Baby was also multi-generational, but it
Mhm.
was only in Harlem. It took place in a brownstone. It took place in a neighbor. I'd seen all those places. I'd walked there many different times before. This book takes place over 150 years and many different terrains, many different ecosystems, many different laws and dialects and weather patterns. All of that is different. It waxes and wanes and it undulates, and I had to really hone in on that. And it was frustrating because I've always considered myself an ambitious person, but there were many times throughout the book where I thought I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Like, I'm not there yet to write an epic. I don't have the range, so to speak. And with the help of my friends and my editor, and just also the love of the story. I think, as cheesy as that sounds, knowing that every time I reopen the draft and I return to those writers and I could see them, that's what also kept me going.
Amazing. And so you mentioned that the novel spans over 150 years and it follows multiple generations. So what additional kind of research went into crafting that generational mapping?
I mean, aside from I had to look at maps
Mhm.
of all the different places I named. Like, for example, the book begins in Natchez, Mississippi. Natchez, Mississippi was one of the wealthiest cities in the antebellum South, close, akin to New Orleans. I actually had to orient the reader of where we were. So when I spoke about the docks, the waterfront, where the city hall was, where the jail was. That was because of a map. I had to look at a literal map. When I was talking about Shreveport, Louisiana, and I named certain streets and what they were called, that was actually from archives. That's literally where they were. That was where the wealthiest would have lived. I think about the dialect, they're not all going to sound the same. Someone who was a recently emancipated woman from Memphis, Mississippi is not going to sound like a 30-something-year-old living in Harlem. It's not going to be the same. So trying to figure out the dialects that sounds true to, or at least historically accurate as possible of the time period. And just granular details. Like if I'm writing about a jail and I'm saying like, it's dim in there. Did they have lights at that time during the jail cell? I remember one time I wrote in a period of 1865 where someone made a sweet tea recipe, which is like a staple in Black Southern households. I had to do the research and realize sweet tea was not considered a big, wide staple at that time. So I had to change it. So little details like that, what someone was wearing, what they had at one time. Was that particular bird flying overhead at that time? Were plants being grown in that particular season? I had to study all of it. It was layers upon layers upon layers.
Interesting. And as you were traveling, were there any like standout conversations with, people you met along the way? Like in the South or like anywhere else in your journey?
Oh, you mean for Zeal or for Wandering Strange Lands?
For either Zeal or
what? Oh, for Wandering Strange Lands, I think the thing is like being from the North, people would talk about their ancestors, but when I went to the Deep South, particularly in the Low Country, Georgia, there were people that knew who they were. For example, they would say, "I'm a 7th generation Gullah Geechee. My ancestors were enslaved at a plantation that's not even 10 miles from here. I could drive you to it." So the temporality between enslavement and freedom is so close. Even in the way they spoke, sometimes they would switch from past to present. So that veil between their ancestors and themselves was very, very thin, probably the thinnest I had ever heard or I've ever even seen. So that's what stays with me.
Interesting. Yeah, and I feel like that's like especially interesting because so much history has been lost for Black folks and people of the diaspora. So it's really incredible that they like still have that clear connection to who they are.
And I think that's the most beautiful thing too that I've realized while writing Wandering Strange Lands and writing Zeal, and even like going on Instagram. Like the other day, I saw these Black American girls that were in conversation with Afro-Brazilian girls. And they were showing the type of handshakes they used to do growing up, these Black American girls. And then the Afro-Brazilian girls did the same handshakes, the same movements with their fists, the same rhythm. And I think that's the miraculous thing about being of the diaspora is that despite there were so many maneuvers to erase us, whether it was our hair, our languages, our behavior, controlling our social life. It doesn't matter where we are in this country or in the world. There's always going to be a link. There's always going to be something that they could not remove besides our bodies. And I think that is something that's really inspiring for me as a writer.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The Black resilience. Love that.
Yeah.
And what do you hope readers take away from Zeal?
Oh, you know what? I think I just want them to be moved. Like, I want them to realize that in a lot of Black families, things do come full circle. It happened in my family, and it happened in other families I interviewed. Like, someone might have an artifact that ties together why your niece has this particular idiosyncrasy, 6 generations later. Like, I want them to be moved. I always said this, at the beginning of my writing career, like, you may not agree with my characters. You may not like them, but if you can understand the motivations for why they did what they had to do, then I have succeeded as a writer. And I think especially for Zeal, where a lot of these human beings, in spite of the brutal systems enforced upon them, had to make really tough decisions. And I'm hoping that when people read this, they just walk away with a little bit more empathy, a little bit more compassion, and a little bit more heart, for themselves and people they don't know. And that's the biggest thing. Zeal is not an intellectual exercise. It is a body exercise. It's a feeling exercise. It's a heart exercise. And once I started to write from a place of prove myself, once I started to write from a place of I'm feeling this as much as I am hoping to alchemize that and put it into prose in a book, I hope that I can transfer that feeling to someone else who's reading it.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel like especially during these times, you all need a little more of that compassion and love and that heart that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And so this is your fourth book. How have you seen your writing and creative process evolve throughout all of your books and to bring you to where you are right now?
That remains to be seen. I shouldn't say that. I should say it remains to be seen because I feel like I always tell people that you are never the same person as who you are when you decide to write a book and when you finish it. And I think that's so true for Zeal. I have grown up so much in the past 4 or 5 years leading to Zeal's publication. And I've changed so much as a person that there was no way that I couldn't, feel that and write that in a book. In fact, one of my dearest friends said during one of the earliest drafts of Zeal, she was like, this is a grown woman's book. Like, yes, Call Baby was grown. All of the books you wrote them when you were an adult, but this is a grown woman's book, meaning that you might have listened to a song or stared at an artwork and realized, oh, this person had to have gone through something to be able to produce a work of this magnitude. And I think the same when it comes to Zeal. Like when I write it and when I wrote it and I reread it and the editors maybe look at it, there was such a feeling of pride of reading it that I haven't gotten, other parts of my hurry up, let's publish this. Now it's like pride that I was able to construct sentences in such a rich way and not rich as in like luxurious. I mean, rich as in like just full of fervor, full of passion. So I think, for Zeal, I think it is a book that for me personally, it exemplifies a writer who was like full of her confidence at this point, like very grounded in her confidence and really much takes ownership of all of the life lessons that she's had up to that point. You may not have to know about them, but as you feel it at a certain point. And I had to go through it. And that's why I was able to write what I had to write, especially when you're talking about interpersonal relationships.
Mm-hmm. And for emerging young writers who are looking to like really build and develop that sense of grounded confidence, what advice would you give them to help them, step into themselves as writers and to share their work in the publishing world?
Do not wait until you're not afraid. I have gotten this question for years. How do you do this when you're, and be afraid? I'm always afraid because when your book is published, it's not yours anymore. It is everyone else's, and anyone else can have a say over it, and you got to let it go. I think if you are afraid to write about something, that means that it's meaningful and it's worthy of being written. So don't wait until the fear passes. Rather, don't let the fear paralyze you. Be afraid, but do it anyway. And I think that's the biggest life lesson or advice that I would give to an emerging writer.
Beautiful. Yeah, powerful words to end this conversation.
Okay.
But before we really end, we're going to ask you a few fun rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Okay, so one, what was your favorite children's book to read growing up?
My favorite children's book was Good Night Moon. I remember the cover. I'm also a person who loves naps, and so that book really sticks out to me. Is Good Night Moon.
I'm also a fellow nap fan.
As am I, as am I. So obviously when you're sitting down to write, it takes a lot of energy out of your day. What's something special that you do to just help you wind down after you've had one of those really long days?
Honestly, before I write, I usually meditate or pray. That's the settling in, the locking in before I even go, and realize that some days I'm gonna have great writing days, other days not gonna be that great. And so when it's done, I make sure I close the Google Doc tab, make sure it's not running in the background because it's gonna be running in my mind. Um, I just wait till the next day and make sure I hydrate and sleep well.
Is there like a special place that just helps spark your creativity?
Just my couch. Like, I cannot write in bed. I cannot write in cafes because I cannot control the noise. I like my couch. I love my home and what I've done with it. And it's just something about being in my own space that really just, and by myself, that really just makes me feel free, so to speak, free to control the sound, free to write. No one's watching me, that sort of thing.
And just like a quick question to close it up. Whenever you have like a sudden idea, is there any way you like specifically get it out? I've heard crazy stories of people writing, waking up in the middle of the night and writing with like a cup of tea and like something they could use like a paintbrush.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't do anything that elaborate. Sometimes it could just be, I could be, New York, you're used to so many different conversations happening at once. It's so much stimuli, but the stimuli can also inspire you. And I think what I usually do is I carry my phone everywhere and I'll just open up my notes app and I'll just jot down a couple of words so I don't forget. And that's it.
And how can listeners and viewers just stay connected with you and your work?
Uh, Listeners can follow me on Bluesky. It's my name, Morgan Jerkins, and they can follow me on Instagram _Morgan Jerkins. And yeah, just support by pre-ordering Zeal. It comes out April 22nd, 2025. Or also ordering my other books and supporting your independent bookstores as well.
Thank you so much, Morgan. We've had a really great time, and I think this was a really enlightening conversation for all of us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking to you both.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's a wrap on today's Lead Her Voice episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our conversation with Morgan. Stay bold, stay inspired, and follow Girl Up USA for more conversations with incredible women. See you next time.